Hey, I'm David Belsky, founder of Flower Hire. I'm sitting here with Mike Siebold, strategic advisor from Flower Hire. Hey, Mike.
David.
This is the inaugural roundup presented by Flower Hire, where we discuss the latest trends and topics within the national cannabis legalization battle. Beautiful backdrop here, Martin Luther King Day, Manhattan Beach, California. Excited to be here with you guys. First topic I want to talk about was shocking, I think, for people that heard about it was the last two states that have transitioned to recreational cannabis, Illinois and Michigan, literally within 1 week of opening what was a limited amount of dispensaries. We're talking about massive supply chain issues in those states.
Sure.
Where there's already a shortage and some of the very few rec stores are having, medical only days, 2 weeks into the legal market. What's happening in these states?
Well, specifically, it's just like any other nascent industry that's basically opening itself up to business. What you have is disequilibrium. You've created a certain kind of supply, but you necessarily have not qualified the demand. And if you actually look at where these states are amongst the union, Illinois itself is surrounded by 4 or 5 specific states. We talked about this before: Wisconsin, Indiana, Missouri, even Kentucky. And even if, and that's a big if, with I think it's 21 specific supply side providers in Illinois, even if they were able to have enough to provide for the Illinois marketplace, you have the consideration of a mass consumer migration from these marketplaces. So what you're seeing is a great/terrible problem to have, which is something that is sought after and needed by a number of people on a recurring basis, but you simply don't have enough to outfit. They've actually said recently, I think as of yesterday or even Friday, that they might have a supply issue that's continuous for the next year at a minimum, just for Illinois specifically. For Michigan, it's similar. So I think what you're going to have over time is hopefully the oversight groups in those states trying to the best of their ability, expedite the supply side as soon and as fast as possible to make sure that they can satisfy the demand on a recurring basis, because whatever projections they have from a taxation standpoint might fall woefully short. And the worst issue is companies that have put in a tremendous amount of money and time getting themselves ready for the legal marketplace for adult use. Some of those consumers might not come back, or they might have other opportunities in other realms. So it's important that they kind of figure this out as soon as possible.
Right, and we talk to operators in the industry, investors in the industry all the time, and obviously we know that when there is a shortage, it creates opportunity. All these operators want to get more flower produced as quickly as possible because with a shortage, there's higher prices, but you can't just snap your fingers and have more flower to ship to dispensaries. It's a process, and there's a lot of expertise and domain knowledge that comes with producing cultivation and cultivating cannabis successfully, and often we hear that the first or even first 2 harvests in any given facility are basically tossed away, right? So it will take a lot of time to solve these problems, and obviously Illinois specifically, when they legislated legalization last year, they jump-started it, but I think with just a handful of dispensaries open and probably another 40 or 50 rec dispensaries opening up in the Chicago area alone in the next 18 months, it's going to be a problem we're going to hear about for a long time. But on the same token, I heard what basically second or third business day of the year, same as last year, Cuomo, governor of New York, came out and said he thinks he's got the votes this year. Cannabis legalization is a top priority for him in New York, and obviously that has incredible ramifications. I mean, there's twice the amount of people that live in New York City proper as Los Angeles proper alone, not to mention that if you look at the greater New York area, we're talking 50, 60 million people within the metro area. So do you think that New York's going to be able to pull it off this year, and why this year, not last year?
Well, there's an important designation to realize, which is they can okay it from a legislative standpoint, but they can also have what's kind of akin to a moratorium. So in Massachusetts, for example, they actually okayed the notion, the idea, and the landscape for an adult use marketplace. But it took them an additional 1 to 2 years, I believe, to basically get themselves retrofitted and augmented for that. The interesting thing about the Mid-Atlantic and the tri-state area is that there has been an active conversation with the leadership in those states, specifically about opening almost en masse when you think about it. So Governor Murphy has actually been speaking to Governor Cuomo for several months now, I think the better part of a year, ever since they shelved the original legislation that was supposed to happen about a year ago, enacting the adult use marketplace. Why that's important is you're actually seeing oversight groups in separate states trying to mitigate the issue of the promulgation of the black market. If you open in New York and set up the adult use marketplace, but Rhode Island and Delaware and New Jersey fall woefully behind and don't have theirs, you might have the issue of the legal landscape bleeding over into the black one, then subsequently affecting those states. So they've been doing that proactively for a very long time. I actually feel like, and this is my opinion, this is a strong opinion loosely held, that I think when the New York marketplace was to go live first, or the New Jersey, you'll see within a pretty short duration one of the other states go live as well to complement that.
Yeah, man, I think it has to happen. I mean, when you can take a 30-minute train ride to a state and come back the same way with a bag full of legally purchased products and sell it on the black market, that's an issue. And
Sure.
It sounds like governors have been thinking about that, the regional coordination and everything like that. I think that with New York potentially falling this year, and obviously California already there, it would be tough for the federal government to ignore things like the Safe Banking Act and everything else when you get to a point where the majority of the population in the U.S. is in states where it's legally acceptable. But we'll see where that goes.
Well, the other consideration is also what are the implications of those states? Because on the face of it, it's you say New York, you say New Jersey, or in Pennsylvania. Those specific states en masse have a larger population than both California and Canada. So you're talking about a massive group of people who already have a disposition towards cannabis. The interesting thing about it is you're right. There's also the idea of being, in the nexus of the major financial institutions in America, in New York appropriately. Like, will they actively get involved once it's at their back door? I believe so. I mean, they already are actively involved in cannabis, but not to the same degree you've seen in some of the other groups. So there's also the idea that once you have these states, it's also about the lobbying groups that follow them, and more importantly, the other people or organizations in those states that might see the validity in the thesis of cannabis and understand it for the first time. It's hard to, in an abstract way, really study cannabis from afar. I think if you were at one of these major institutions, these tier one banks, go out and actually experience what it's like and the MO and the way that these companies, what they need from a resource standpoint, you actually get a better picture of instituting a better marketplace potentially.
Right. I just think about, the size of that marketplace, even, compared to states like Illinois and Michigan that are having, supply chain problems. And I mean, Illinois has some massive cannabis companies based there, Cresco Labs, GTI. Michigan has been a thriving medical market for quite some time. And New York's a medical market, but it's very, very limited, right? I think, from a potency standpoint and the type of products you can buy. So I think the supply chain problems will permeate even if it does become legal for 3, 4, 5 years before it all finally stabilizes and normalizes there.
Well, to add, and I agree with you, to add to that point, the other consideration is we work with a number of companies that are in similar states. We kind of live in a bubble when it comes to California because we have extremely amenable weather for a plant that can oftentimes be pretty fickle. When you talk about Michigan, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, you're talking about, creating the supply side in a different arrangement of an ecosystem. So the other consideration is not only having enough space to grow this on indoor capacity because the weather is, I'm from, the tri-state area. It's pretty shitty. That's why I live in California. The other thing that's interesting about it as kind of a silver lining, I guess you could say, is once you have the expertise, and we talk to those people on an active basis, we actually move them to some of these nascent states. When you have that expertise that can migrate and best practices, I think the pervasive issues of having first-timers in those states actually subsides. You have larger operations that can supply a larger marketplace with bigger implications. And at the same time, when you have indoor facilities that are, again, built appropriately and properly with that expertise, I think you have more of a guideline to understand what your supply side is specifically versus what can happen in California, which frankly can be inundated with lots of different flower from all sorts of places and avenues. It's actually easier to keep your finger on the pulse of your supply side when it's indoor.
It's true.
I mean, in theory.
Well, in theory, it becomes more scientific. You can dial it in more, right? You know what your yield's going to be, and a lot of the sun-grown outdoor cannabis from California it's more fickle. I mean, there's artisans that have gotten it down, but you should be able to forecast it a lot better once it's there, because you have control of the entire system.
In theory, I mean,
I'm not a scientist, but
well, we feel remiss if we didn't say that, because this is a cash and carry industry, and because we lack, I mean, at its most basic, the foundational aspect of banking, because it's cash, there's always going to be graft, there's always going to be theft. In my opinion, I think having states that have an environment that is not particularly welcoming to the idea of outdoor grow, I think that allows you to kind of mandate and understand what you're going to be able to provide on a recurring basis.
Right. Well, kind of similar, but changing gears here. I mean, I was, Bernie Sanders came out and said that he thinks that he's for the cannabis legalization, obviously, and for unionization of cannabis facilities. We just saw a major kind of grow facility of Cresco Labs outside of Chicago, and I believe in Joliet, Illinois, pass a unionization for that facility specifically. Obviously, we've got to do a little bit more research to understand which specific union that's getting folded into and everything like that. But I think if you look at cannabis as being a source I guess it's more fuel to the notion that cannabis is a source of middle class jobs. Cannabis is a source to lift people that don't have access to good jobs. And I think a lot of states are paying attention to cannabis right now purely just from a job creation standpoint. Now, who knows? Illinois is a very kind of pro-union state. Obviously, California is as well, but largely the unions haven't really impacted the landscape of California yet, except maybe on the delivery side, right? So it'd be interesting to see what happens from that one isolated vote, if that gets spread to all of Cresco and all their facilities in Illinois, if that gets spread to the other MSOs, and if we're really seeing the rise of another labor movement, kind of following this emerging, marketplace.
When you talk about unionization, there's a couple of things that come with that are caveats. One is the idea of collective bargaining. I think it's really important because, again, unions used to be central to our economy, very much so. And then they were, in very short order, kind of decimated for a number of different reasons and causes. Not necessarily of their own doing, but sometimes. The important implication in my mind is if you have a union that is not specifically stipulated in a state, but that is on a national presence, the other idea is the idea of best practices moving seamlessly across those professionals. It's one thing to say that you have, a group of cultivators in California that have unionized to specifically stipulate the best kind of pay deserved for work that is really tenuous and challenging. It's nothing to say that you have the same sort of group in Michigan that don't have the exact same kind of skill set and considerations, but they are able to work en masse to have a free flow of exchange about not just the pay grade, but also the skill set needed. And I think that's an important distinction. I mean, education is severely lacking. Sometimes we silo it into the first-time consumer experience, and that's true. But there's also the fact that there have only been so many people that have taken this as a profession for so long. Unions, I think, in a way, help to expedite that conversation
100%.
Considerably. On the flip side, thinking about the operators that have to work alongside or in some instances contend with unions, because unions and collective bargaining can have unreasonable or unrealistic expectations, which can be like premeditated resentments a little bit. There's also the fact that you're talking about an industry that the margins are extremely low right now. The regulatory regimes are not amenable to cannabis in any shape or fashion, truly, if you're being honest about it. So the idea of having to have collective bargaining to give people more is an important thing, but in a landscape where you only have so much to provide, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in some instances to pay people more when you can't repurpose enough cash to keep your lights on.
Well, I just think it just shows how quickly and rapidly this industry is maturing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the idea that, in one hand, in a reactive position, it forces operators to create world-class employment cultures, pay people fairly, give them benefits to ward off potential unionization, which is a net positive. And at the same time, I mean, I think at the end of the day, we look at cannabis, it's not like any other industry. It's not like a bunch of smart people in Silicon Valley are going to go become billionaires overnight. This is an industry that creates jobs across the spectrum in every single state in which it exists. So I think, and if the unions could somehow tie in employment and training into, marginalized groups, disproportionately affected from the drug war, you could really see a lot of value that effort could bring into the legal cannabis market.
I agree. I would say it's one of the ways to reconcile people disproportionately affected by the war on drugs. I mean, it's great to say that. I think the idea of social equity has been, up to this point, a promise, but a kind of an empty one.
Right.
I think the idea of collective bargaining unionization specifically based around that to complement people who can capture those licenses from those arenas and have people who can actively put their skill sets to work in the best kind of environment possible is very, very positive. It's hard to know. It's really challenging because, again, states have different mindsets and different methodologies in how to grapple with the cannabis question.
It's true. I mean, it's a question that touches every fabric of society, for sure, and everyone seems to have an opinion. But one thing's for sure, the landscape right now is changing on a weekly basis, and it feels like we're forming history, and it's exciting, you know. So thanks for sitting down with me and helping me make sense of all this. It's been fun. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.